Have your orchid's leaves become softened, wrinkled, and droopy like this? You thought your orchid was dehydrated and started watering it. You watered it and watered it and watered it even more. You tried everything, but the orchid leaves wouldn't recover because the reason isn't dehydration, it's rotten orchid roots. Today, I will explain the cause of root rot in orchids and show you step by step what to do with an orchid with rotten roots. Welcome to my Orchid Goddess channel. The solution recovering an orchid with wrinkled and drooping leaves is not watering the orchid because the roots are not healthy and cannot provide your orchid with enough water, minerals, and necessary nutrients. As a result, the leaves become wrinkled, the orchid stops growing and doesn't bloom, and may even die. I will show you this using two orchids. This orchid hasn't bloomed for 2 years. The first thing that catching our attention is how wet the pot was, even the water that had accumulated under the saucer. In orchids, constant wetness equals lack of oxygen. If you don't know how, when, and how much to water your orchid, and you water it according to a specific schedule like other houseplants, the orchid pot will most likely remain constantly moist, and the roots cannot develop properly in this moisture. Moisture deprives the orchid roots of oxygen, and after a while, the roots die. Dead roots cannot carry enough nutrients to the orchid, and the orchid leaves begin to wrinkle and droop, and your orchid will not bloom. As you can see, the constantly wet pot completely killed the roots of this orchid, and there was a very strong smell in the pot. The only reason this orchid hasn't bloomed for 2 years is because its roots died. The second major cause of root rot in orchids is choosing the wrong potting mix. Their roots need plenty of air. They are plants that live on trees in nature anyway. Soil and peat should absolutely not be used for orchids. You can use thick tree bark with perlite and create holes around the pot to allow air circulation. Choosing the right potting mix according to your home's humidity level is also important. For example, if you live in a very dry place, adding coconut shells or moss to the potting mix will help balance the humidity for a good pot. The third biggest cause of root rot in orchids is cold weather and wet potting mix. Orchids absorb water very slowly in cold weather. In this case, the pot remains wet for a very long time and the roots don't get enough oxygen. The roots turn brown, the leaves soften, and many people confuse this with hydration and continue to water the orchid. The orchid you see on the screen right now experienced exactly this situation and was rescued. I rescued this orchid on a morning when the night temperature was minus 10 degrees Celsius. It was outside in the cold, and as you can see, the pot was quite moist. Therefore, root rot occurred and the orchid leaves began to soften. Meanwhile, I would be very happy if you supported me by subscribing to my channel and leaving comments. The fourth biggest cause of root rot in orchids is salt stress due to overfertilization. What we call liquid fertilizer is actually dissolved mineral salt. When you give too much fertilizer, the pot becomes salty. This makes it difficult for the roots to absorb water. In some cases, the roots even burn and completely lose their function. Yellowing of the leaf tips, blackening of the root tips, and the formation of a white layer of the pot are signs of salt accumulation. Orchids live in a low nutrients, rain-fed system in their natural environment. In most cases, the biggest cause of root rot is over-fertilization. Absolutely do not fertilize repeatedly. Let's say you gave an diluted fertilizer on the first of the month. During the next root drying period, be sure to water with plain water. In other words, do not give fertilizer a second time. Otherwise, you will burn and rot the roots. I recommended watering by immersion. I also tried this method on my own orchids. This way, you actually completely wash the pot and remove all the salt. Also, once a month, rinse it under the tap and just the pot. You can also wash away the salts by letting them run off. This will prevent salt buildup in your orchid. So, let's say you have diagnosed root rot in your orchid. What will you do? I'll explain. But first, if you have watched my video this far, please press the like button, and if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel to support me. Of course, the first thing you need to do when your orchid has root rot is to empty the pot and clean the roots. I cut off all the roots that are turned black, softened and stringy. However, if there are roots that are yellowed but still firm, I leave them because these are roots that continue to develop and grow. If there are still some roots, healthy roots, you can plant it a new pot. After cutting and cleaning the roots, you need to let the orchid rest in a shady place for 2 hours because the place you cut needs to dry. You can think of this as an open wound. If you plant it directly in the soil, these cut areas will not close and will continue to rot. Before planting, soak the tree bark in a lukewarm water for about 8 hours. Drain it and then plant it in a pot. But what if your orchid doesn't have many roots left? What can you do then? The easiest and most inexpensive method is water culture. Be careful not to rush the root pruning. If there are roots that look dried out, leave them. As you can see in this example, those roots continue to grow vigorously. Now, I'm showing you how I rooted an orchid had stopped growing, had softened leaves, and still had flowers, even though its roots had been pruned 1.5 years ago. First, if your orchid has a flower stalk, you absolutely must cut it off at the root because the orchid needs to use all its energy to develop new roots and leaves. I placed the orchid in a glass jar for water culture and kept it outside to benefit from the abundant sunshine, light and air circulation of the summer months. And look at the orchid's amazing transformation a few weeks later. Roots sprouted everywhere. It sprouted a new leaf and continues to grow so beautifully that I will be reporting it soon. For rerooting completely rootless orchids, I have a great video on my channel. I'm leaving the link above. So today I talked about root rot and leaf softening problems and their solution in orchids. Until the next video, goodbye with love.